The Wyoming wilderness in 1889 was unforgiving, a place where men came to escape their pasts and women rarely ventured at all. In a remote valley nestled between the Bighorn Mountains, there stood a cabin that had been built with the expectation of change, a home prepared for a woman who would never arrive as promised. But fate had other plans. Eleanor Hartley stepped off the stagecoach at the small settlement of Redemption Creek with a single trunk, a stack of letters tied with ribbon, and the crushing knowledge that the man who had summoned her across the country was dead. She had traveled 2,000 miles to become a wife to a stranger, only to discover that the stranger had been buried 3 weeks prior. What she didn't know was that his brother, a man even more isolated, even more broken, even more determined to live alone, was about to change everything. This is the story of how a mail-order bride, abandoned and stranded in the frontier, learned that sometimes the life you're forced to accept becomes the life you choose. And how a mountain man, certain he wanted no part of love or companionship, discovered that the right person could transform solitude into something resembling home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor had been corresponding with Nathaniel Hawthorne for 14 months. 14 months of letters that arrived at the boarding house in Philadelphia, where she worked as a seamstress. Letters written in careful script that spoke of a ranch in Wyoming territory, of opportunity, of a man building something real in a wild land and needing a wife to help build it alongside him. She was 26 years old and had resigned herself to spinsterhood. Her mother had died when she was 16, and her father, a merchant whose fortunes had declined with each passing year, had finally suggested, not unkindly, that she might secure her own future rather than wait for him to provide one. Eleanor wasn't beautiful in the way that attracted proposals, but she was capable, intelligent, and skilled with her hands. The letters from Nathaniel Hawthorne seemed like providence. "I am a simple man," he had written in his second letter, "but not an unkind one. I have built something here, and it needs a woman's touch. I can offer you security, land, a purpose. In return, I ask only that you be willing to work, to learn, and to build a life with me in this beautiful, terrible country." The letters had continued through the seasons. Nathaniel described the cabin he was building, the cattle he was raising, the mountains that surrounded his property like protective walls. He wrote about his brother Samuel, who lived several miles away and who had counseled him that a mail-order bride was foolish, that women weren't suited for frontier life. But Nathaniel seemed certain, and his certainty had convinced Eleanor. She had saved every penny from her seamstress work. She had purchased a modest wardrobe suitable for ranch life. She had read every book about frontier living she could find. She had imagined, in the quiet hours before sleep, what this man might be like, what their life together might become. She had imagined many things. She had not imagined stepping off a stagecoach in a town she'd never heard of, to be met by the station master's grim expression and the news that Nathaniel Hawthorne had died of pneumonia 3 weeks earlier. "The letter should have reached you," the station master, a man named Curtis, who had the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life in harsh climates, said apologetically. "His brother Samuel sent it near 2 months back. Must have gotten lost in the mail." Eleanor stood, holding her trunk, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet in a way that had nothing to do with the stagecoach ride. "He's dead." The words felt absurd, impossible. Nathaniel had written to her just 6 weeks prior, describing the final touches on the cabin, planning for her arrival. "Pneumonia takes people fast out here," Curtis said. "One day they're fine, the next they're burning with fever. There's no doctor closer than 50 miles, and even then, there's only so much medicine can do against the mountain cold." Eleanor's mind raced through practical considerations, even as shock threatened to overwhelm her. She had spent nearly all her savings on the journey. She had no family to return to. Her father had passed 2 years prior. She had given notice at the boarding house. She had made a one-way decision based on promises from a dead man. His brother, she heard herself say. Samuel Hawthorne. Where can I find him? Curtis's expression grew more complicated. Samuel lives about 10 miles north, up in the high country. But miss, I should tell you Samuel is not his brother in temperament. Nathaniel was the sociable one. The one who thought he could build community. Samuel is... Curtis paused, searching for diplomatic language. Samuel is a man who prefers his own company. Did Nathaniel leave any instructions, any arrangements for? Eleanor couldn't finish the sentence. For the mail-order bride he'd ordered like a piece of merchandise? Curtis led her to the station office, where he produced a letter addressed in the same careful script Eleanor had come to know well over 14 months. Her hands shook as she opened it. My dear Eleanor, if you are reading this letter, it means I have not lived to meet you. Curtis, I trust, will explain. I have pneumonia, and the fever has taken me to places I didn't expect to go. I find myself thinking of a woman I never knew, only in letters, and wondering if God would have made us happy together. I have made arrangements for Curtis to help you, should this letter reach you in time. I am leaving you my property, the cabin, 20 acres of improved land, and a modest sum in cash. You may do with it as you wish. Return to Philadelphia, build a new life here, or accept the proposal my brother Samuel has refused to consider. Samuel is a good man, though a difficult one. Our parents are long dead, and he has spent the last 5 years choosing solitude over society. But he is honorable, and I have asked Curtis to encourage him to help you, should you choose to stay. I'm sorry, Eleanor, for the false hope. I'm sorry for the journey you have made. I am sorry for the future we might have shared, but will not. With respect and regret, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, each reading making it no more real, no more comprehensible. She had come to marry a man. That man no longer existed, and somewhere in the mountains above this town was another man, a man who apparently wanted nothing to do with civilization, let alone a widow he'd never met. What was the proposal? Eleanor asked Curtis. The one Samuel refused to consider? Nathaniel asked me to suggest to Samuel that he might marry you instead, Curtis said carefully. Not for love, you understand. Samuel doesn't believe in that sort of thing, but for practicality. A woman out here, alone, would face difficulties. A woman with a husband would be more secure. Eleanor felt something bitter rise in her throat. A practical marriage to a man I've never met, in place of the marriage to a different man I've never met, except this one wanted no part of it. That sums it up, Curtis agreed. Eleanor looked out the station window at the Wyoming landscape, vast and empty and impossibly foreign. The sky was enormous, the mountains distant but dominant, the town itself small enough to walk across in 15 minutes. She had come seeking a new life, and instead she'd found herself marooned in a place where she had no resources, no family, and no clear path forward. I need to see the property, Eleanor said finally. The cabin Nathaniel mentioned. Can you arrange that? Curtis nodded slowly. I can take you there myself. Samuel's been checking on it, making sure nothing's fallen into disrepair. He should know you're coming, though I can't promise what kind of welcome you'll receive. The ride to Nathaniel's cabin took 3 hours, traveling north and then higher into the foothills, where the temperature dropped and the air grew thin. Eleanor sat in the wagon Curtis drove, clutching the letter Nathaniel had written, trying to reconcile the man she'd imagined from his correspondence with the reality of his death. The cabin, when it finally came into view, was both better and worse than she'd expected. It was sturdily built, the logs expertly fitted, the roof sound, and the windows glazed with real glass rather than oiled paper. There was a porch, and a small structure that must be the outhouse, and a larger building she assumed was the barn. Around it spread the 20 acres Nathaniel had mentioned, some cleared for planting, some still wild with prairie grass and wildflowers. It was beautiful in a severe way. It was also terrifyingly isolated. Curtis helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the cabin door. I'll leave you to settle, he said. Samuel usually comes by every few days to check on things. He'll know you're here soon enough. Wait, Eleanor said, panic rising. Where will you go? Will you be nearby? Back to town, Curtis said gently. It's about 3 hours' ride. You'll be safer here than anywhere else. There's food in the larder, firewood stacked, and everything you need to survive. Nathaniel prepared it for you, even if he didn't live to see you arrive. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to demand that Curtis stay, wanted to insist that this situation was impossible. But she could see in his expression that he'd already made his decision, and she recognized the futility of protest. She watched his wagon disappear down the mountain road, taking with it her last connection to civilization. Then she turned to face the cabin that was now, by some twist of inheritance and circumstance, hers. The door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was clean and well organized. There was a bed frame, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, a large stone fireplace with wood stacked beside it. There was even a mirror on the wall. Eleanor set her trunk at the foot of the bed and sat down, trying to process the enormity of her situation. She was a mail-order bride without a groom. She was a woman alone in the wilderness, 26 years old, with nowhere to go and no one depending on her. She was, for the first time in her life, completely independent. The thought terrified her almost as much as it liberated her. Eleanor spent the rest of that day exploring her new property. Behind the cabin, she found a garden plot that had been prepared but never planted. In the barn, she found tools, a plow, seeds stored in careful rows. Nathaniel had been thorough in his preparation. He had left her everything she needed to survive, everything except the one thing that mattered, his presence, his companionship, his promise of a shared future. As evening fell and Eleanor lit a lamp inside the cabin, she wondered what Samuel Hawthorne would think when he discovered her. Would he be angry that a stranger had invaded his brother's property? Would he be as opposed to her presence as he apparently had been to the idea of marrying her? Would he simply ignore her and hope she went away? She didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, as Eleanor was attempting to build a fire in the stove, a task more complicated than she'd anticipated, she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Through the cabin window, she saw a man ride into the clearing in front of the house. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair beneath a worn hat. His face was difficult to read from a distance, but his posture suggested tension, wariness. This must be Samuel Hawthorne, the brother who preferred solitude, the man who had refused Nathaniel's proposal. Eleanor straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and stepped outside to meet him. Samuel dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in her appearance with an intensity that made Eleanor conscious of every imperfection, the travel dust still clinging to her hem, the way her hair had come partially loose from its pins, the fact that she was clearly a woman who had no business being alone in the wilderness. "I'm Eleanor Hartley," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Nathaniel's mail-order bride, or more accurately, Nathaniel's intended bride, since he—" She paused, unsure how much she needed to explain. "Since he passed." Samuel's expression didn't change. "Curtis told me. I came to make sure you had what you needed to get back to town. The next stage comes through in 4 days. Eleanor met his gaze directly. "I'm not going back to town. This property is mine now. Nathaniel left it to me in his will." "Nathaniel was a fool," Samuel said flatly, "buying a wife from Philadelphia like she was a piece of furniture. And you were a fool to come." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed calmly, "but I'm here now, and I have nowhere else to go." Samuel was silent for a long moment, studying her as if trying to determine if she was serious. Then he said, "You won't last the winter. No woman could, alone, out here." "Then I'll leave when I can no longer sustain myself," Eleanor said. "But until then, I'm staying." Samuel turned toward his horse, seemingly done with the conversation. But Eleanor, desperate and determined in equal measure, called after him. "I can work. I'm skilled with a needle, with cooking, with organization. If you need labor, I can pay my way by providing it. I don't ask for charity. I ask only for the opportunity to prove I can survive here." Samuel paused, with his hand on his horse's bridle. He didn't turn around, but Eleanor heard him speak, his voice so quiet she almost missed it. "The well needs clearing. The garden needs planting. The cabin roof has a leak on the north side that needs patching before the next storm." He finally turned to face her. "If you're staying, you might as well make yourself useful." It wasn't a welcome, it wasn't acceptance. But it was, Eleanor realized, something close to permission. "When do we start?" she asked. Samuel mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "Tomorrow, first light. Come prepared to work." And with that, he rode away, leaving Eleanor standing in front of her inherited cabin, uncertain of whether she'd just negotiated a path to survival or agreed to something far more complicated and unpredictable. She looked at the vast Wyoming landscape surrounding her, at the mountains in the distance, at the empty sky above. She thought of her life in Philadelphia, small, predictable, confined. She thought of Nathaniel's letters, full of hope for a future that would never arrive. She thought of Samuel's dark eyes and unwelcoming expression. Then she went back inside the cabin to prepare for tomorrow, knowing only that her life had fundamentally changed and that nothing would ever be the same. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor woke before dawn, her body aching from the stagecoach journey and the unfamiliar bed. She had barely slept, her mind churning with anxiety about the day ahead. She dressed in the most practical outfit she'd brought, a simple cotton dress without excessive trim, lacing her boots tightly to prepare for whatever labor awaited her. In the kitchen area of the cabin, she found a small cast-iron stove that she managed, after several frustrating minutes, to coax into producing enough heat to boil water. She made coffee using grounds she found in the larder, and bread that Nathaniel had apparently left stored in a sealed tin. The bread was hard and required dunking to eat, but it was sustenance. By the time Samuel arrived on horseback, Eleanor had the well-clearing supplies assembled on the porch: buckets, rope, and tools she'd found in the barn. She'd never cleared a well before, but she'd watched men work in Philadelphia and understood the basic principle. One removed debris, cleaned the walls, ensured the water ran clear. Samuel dismounted without greeting. He was dressed for work, worn trousers, a shirt with rolled sleeves that revealed forearms corded with muscle, a hat that had seen better years. His expression was as unwelcoming as it had been the day before. "You've got soft hands," he observed, not bothering with pleasantries. "You'll develop blisters." "Then I'll develop them," Eleanor replied. She'd considered wrapping her hands before he arrived, but had decided against it. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her try to protect herself. Samuel grunted something that might have been approval, or might have been skepticism. He gestured for her to follow him to the well, which lay about 50 yards from the cabin, partially obscured by a small stand of pine trees. The well was deeper than Eleanor had expected. She couldn't see the bottom when she peered down into it. Samuel dropped a weighted line and pulled it back up, showing her what he'd retrieved: mud, leaves, a bird's nest made from straw and twigs, and what appeared to be the remains of a squirrel that hadn't made it out. "It's been neglected," Samuel said flatly. "Nathaniel meant to clean it before winter, but he didn't. Now it needs to be done before the next heavy rain, or the water will be filthy." Eleanor looked at the well, then at Samuel, then back at the well. "How do we do this?" For the first time, something that might have been respect flickered across Samuel's face. He didn't ask if she was sure about this, didn't suggest that perhaps she'd prefer to do something less arduous. Instead, he simply began to teach her. He showed her how to secure the rope, how to lower the bucket, how to use the long-handled scraper to dislodge debris from the well's interior. He explained that she needed to be careful not to dislodge so much at once that it overwhelmed the bucket. The work required patience and precision, not strength. Eleanor discovered that he was right. The work was harder than she'd anticipated, not because of the physical labor itself, but because of the repetition and the careful attention it demanded. Lower the bucket, fill it with scraped material, pull it up, empty it, repeat for hours. Samuel worked alongside her, and Eleanor realized he wasn't simply supervising. He was working just as hard as she was, scraping from inside the well while she managed the bucket system. His arms were darker than hers, marked with old scars, and she found herself wondering what his life had been like before he chose isolation in the mountains. By midday, Eleanor's hands were indeed blistered, though she didn't mention it. Her dress was filthy with mud and dust, her back ached from bending and pulling, and her arms felt weak. But the well was cleaner, noticeably so. The water that now filled the bottom was clearer than it had been that morning. "We'll finish tomorrow," Samuel said, pulling himself out of the well one final time. "You've done adequate work. Most people quit after the first hour." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but Eleanor recognized it as close as Samuel probably came. "I'm not most people," she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened slightly. "No," he agreed. "You're not." Samuel left before Eleanor began preparing dinner, but not before he showed her how to maintain the well's cleanliness going forward. Simple tasks that would prevent the debris from accumulating again. He demonstrated with the practiced ease of someone who'd maintained this property for years. After he left, Eleanor collapsed into the chair inside the cabin and examined her hands. The blisters had formed in at least 6 places. Her palms were raw, and the skin between her fingers was red and angry. She found a jar of salve in the cabin's supplies. Apparently Nathaniel had anticipated injuries and applied it carefully. As she worked on her hands, Eleanor reflected on the day. Samuel hadn't been warm, but he hadn't been cruel. He'd treated her like a person capable of difficult work, which was somehow more respectful than if he'd treated her like a fragile thing that needed protection. She wondered if that was intentional or simply how he was. The next morning, despite her blistered hands, Eleanor wrapped them in strips of cloth and prepared to return to the well. Samuel arrived at the same time as he had the previous day, and together they resumed the work. This time, Eleanor felt less uncertainty. She understood the rhythm of the task, understood what needed to be done. By the middle of the second day, the well was clean. The water that filled it was clear enough that Eleanor could see the rocky bottom. Samuel pulled up a bucket and drank from it directly, then handed it to Eleanor. The water was cold and tasted faintly of minerals and stone, completely different from the water in Philadelphia, but refreshing in a way she hadn't expected. "This is good work," Samuel said, which Eleanor had learned was his version of high praise. "It should stay clean now if you maintain it weekly." "I will," Eleanor assured him. Samuel looked at the pile of cleared material debris accumulated over months of neglect. "Tomorrow we start on the garden. There's planting to be done, and the season is moving fast. By August, the weather can turn harsh." Eleanor nodded, though anxiety flickered through her. She had never planted a garden. She knew the theory from books, but theory and practice were different things. "I'll be ready," she said. The next morning, when Eleanor went to prepare for work, she found that Samuel had already arranged the garden plot. He'd plowed it real plowing, not just clearing it, but turning the soil over in careful rows. He was waiting for her when she emerged from the cabin, armed with the seeds she'd found in the barn. "I've prepared the beds," he said without preamble. "You'll plant. I've marked the rows. Each seed packet tells you the spacing and depth." Eleanor examined the packets: carrots, beans, squash, lettuce, beets. The writing on each was careful and precise, in the same script as Nathaniel's letters. He had planned every detail of this farm, she realized. He had prepared for her arrival like a man making peace with God before battle. Samuel showed her how to make the planting holes, how deep, how wide, how far apart. Then he left her to the work, though he remained in the garden, repairing the fence that kept deer and other wildlife away from the crops. Eleanor planted all day, her wrapped hands making the work awkward, but the blisters gradually toughening into calluses. She found a rhythm to the work: kneel, make the hole, place the seed, cover it, move forward. The repetition became almost meditative. As she worked, she found herself thinking about Nathaniel. She'd received his letters for 14 months, but they had been the words of a stranger, carefully crafted to present an appealing picture of frontier life. Working in the garden that he'd planned, she felt closer to him than she ever had in their correspondence. This garden represented his vision for what his life could be: productive, organized, full of potential. She wondered what he would have been like in person. Would the man have matched the letters? Would he have been kind, patient? Would he have loved her, or would they have been strangers forever, two people who'd made a business arrangement? "You're thinking too hard." Samuel's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I can see it in your face." Eleanor looked up to find him watching her over the fence he was mending. "I was thinking about Nathaniel, about what he imagined this place would be." Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Nathaniel always had grand plans. He believed in possibility. He paused, seeming to decide how much to share. "I stopped believing in possibility a long time ago." "What changed you?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too intrusive. But Samuel surprised her by answering. "I lost someone," he said simply. "Before I came here, a woman I was going to marry. She died of cholera in Omaha while I was away working. By the time I got back, she was already buried." He returned his attention to the fence. "After that, I decided that people were more burden than blessing. It's easier to be alone." Eleanor understood in that moment why Samuel had refused Nathaniel's proposal. The suggestion that he marry her hadn't been just an inconvenient imposition. It had been a direct contradiction of everything he'd decided about how to live his life. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said quietly, "for your loss, and for imposing myself on your solitude." "You haven't imposed," Samuel said, which was perhaps the most generous thing he could have said. "You work hard, and you don't complain." "That's more than I expected." As the days progressed, a pattern emerged. Eleanor would wake early and prepare breakfast, simple meals of bread and eggs and coffee. Samuel would arrive by mid-morning, and they would work together on whatever task needed completion. The well was now clean and functioning perfectly. The garden was planted. The leak in the roof was repaired using materials Samuel brought from his own property. Eleanor's hands continued to toughen, the blisters fading into calluses. Her skin darkened from sun exposure. Her muscles, initially aching from unaccustomed labor, began to grow stronger. She started to understand the rhythm of the mountain property. What work had to be done each week? What could wait until later in the season? More. Importantly, she began to understand Samuel. He spoke very little, but his silence was becoming less uncomfortable. Eleanor found that she could read his moods from his expressions, from the way he moved, from the quality of his attention. When he was frustrated with a task, his jaw tightened. When he was satisfied with completed work, his shoulders relaxed slightly. When he looked at her, sometimes there was something in his eyes that wasn't quite hostility, a kind of careful assessment, as if he was trying to determine whether she was real or some temporary manifestation that would disappear. One afternoon, as they were working on reinforcing the barn, Samuel asked her a direct question. "Why did you really come out here? Don't tell me it was just about Nathaniel. Nobody travels 2,000 miles for a stranger." Eleanor paused in her work, considering how to answer honestly. "My life in Philadelphia was small. I was a seamstress, living in a boarding house, sewing other people's dreams into cloth. I had no family, no prospects, no future that I could see. When Nathaniel's letters arrived, they represented possibility. They represented a chance to build something of my own, instead of helping others build theirs. "And now," Samuel pressed, "now that Nathaniel is dead and you're stuck here with me." Eleanor looked at him directly. "Now I still have the possibility. It's just different than I imagined. But I can grow things here. I can work and see the results of that work. I can look at the garden I planted and know that I did that with my own hands. That's more than I had before." Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When the winter comes, it's brutal. The snow can be 6 feet deep. The temperature drops so cold that exposed skin freezes in minutes. Some days you can't leave the cabin because the wind is too fierce. If you stay, you need to know that." "I understand," Eleanor said, and she did, or at least she believed she did. She understood that winters were difficult in the mountains. She didn't fully comprehend what winter would mean until she experienced it, but she was beginning to understand that understanding wasn't always possible in advance. Sometimes you had to simply move forward. "Nathaniel left you money," Samuel said abruptly. "Enough that you could leave, go back to Philadelphia or anywhere else you wanted. You don't have to stay." "Do you want me to leave?" Eleanor asked. Samuel looked away. "No," he said finally. "I don't." It was the first time he'd admitted anything like preference regarding her presence, and Eleanor felt something shift between them. They were no longer strangers forced into proximity by circumstance. They were becoming something else, colleagues perhaps, or friends. The category was uncertain, but the shift was real. As the day faded and Samuel prepared to leave, Eleanor said, "Thank you for teaching me how to live here, for not turning me away." "You earned your place," Samuel replied. "That's different than being given one out of charity." And as Eleanor watched him ride away toward his own property in the distance, she realized that she was beginning to hope he might be right. That she had earned her place, that she belonged here, in this vast and beautiful and harsh landscape, in this cabin that Nathaniel had built, but Samuel was helping her learn to maintain. The future was still uncertain, but it was no longer terrifying in quite the same way. Summer had fully arrived in the Wyoming territory. The days stretched long and warm, and Eleanor had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural now. She woke before dawn, tended the animals that had somehow become her responsibility, maintained the garden that was growing thick with vegetables, and prepared meals that had evolved from basic sustenance into something approaching actual cooking. Samuel still came most days, though his visits had changed character. He no longer came to teach her tasks. He came because the work on his own property had become secondary to the work on hers. Eleanor pretended not to notice this shift, but she was acutely aware of it. The mountain man, who had once seemed determined to have nothing to do with her, now appeared unable to leave her to manage everything alone. It was early July when the stranger arrived. Eleanor was in the garden, harvesting beans that had begun to produce in abundance, when she heard the sound of an unfamiliar horse approaching. She straightened, shielding her eyes from the sun, and saw a man riding up to the cabin, not Samuel, but someone younger, with red hair and an easy smile that seemed out of place in these mountains. "Eleanor Hartley?" the man called out, dismounting with a fluidity that suggested he'd spent his life on horseback. "Yes," Eleanor replied cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Eleanor Hartley." The man approached with his hand extended. "Name's David Winters. I'm the territorial surveyor. Curtis, at the station mentioned there was a woman out here alone, and I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. Make sure you weren't, well, being taken advantage of or anything." Eleanor shook his hand, finding it warm and calloused. David Winters had the kind of face that made people trust him, immediately open, friendly, genuinely concerned. "That's kind of you, Mr. Winters, but I'm managing quite well. Call me David, please." He looked around the property with professional interest. "You've done impressive work here." The garden alone, that's not the work of someone new to farming. You from a ranch background? Philadelphia, Eleanor admitted. I'm self-taught, mostly from books and trial and error. David's eyebrows rose. Philadelphia? That's quite a journey. What brought you all the way out here? Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger. But David's manner was so earnest, so genuinely interested rather than judgmental, that she found herself explaining. She told him about Nathaniel's letters, about the mail-order bride arrangement, about arriving to discover Nathaniel had died. That's a hard circumstance, David said, and he sounded like he meant it. But you've clearly made the best of it. You've built something real here. I had help, Eleanor said, glancing toward the property line where Samuel's cabin was barely visible in the distance. Samuel Hawthorne, Nathaniel's brother, he's helped me learn everything. David's expression shifted subtly. Samuel Hawthorne, the man who lives up in the high country. Yes. Do you know him? Not well, David said, but I know of him. He's got something of a reputation for being unfriendly. People say he came out here to get away from civilization, that he doesn't want anything to do with society. David paused. Has he been taking advantage of the situation, being improper? Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication. Absolutely not. Samuel has been nothing but respectful. He's taught me how to maintain this property, how to survive here. He's been a friend. David studied her face carefully, and Eleanor realized he was trying to determine if she was telling the truth or protecting someone. I'm glad to hear that, he said finally. But Eleanor, you should know there's gossip in town. People are talking about a woman alone out here with Samuel Hawthorne. Tongues are wagging, if you understand my meaning. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She hadn't thought about how her situation might appear to others. We've done nothing improper. We're barely even... She stopped, unsure how to explain their relationship. I believe you, David said gently. But belief isn't always enough to stop gossip. People can be cruel, especially about a woman living alone with a man. You might want to consider your options. What options? Eleanor asked. I can't leave. This is my home now. You could marry, David said quietly. That would put an end to the talk. A woman with a husband is protected in ways a woman alone never can be. Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but she was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at a hard gallop. Samuel burst into the clearing, his expression dark, and his hand already reaching for the rifle he kept tied to his saddle. David Winters, Samuel said, his voice tight with tension. What are you doing on my property? Your property? David seemed surprised. I thought this was Nathaniel's property. Curtis mentioned, Nathaniel is dead. The property is Eleanor's, Samuel said flatly. And I don't appreciate you showing up here uninvited, putting ideas in her head. Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. Samuel, Mr. Winters was just being neighborly. He was making sure I was safe. Was he now? Samuel's eyes didn't leave David. And did you find her unsafe, Winters? Did you find her in need of rescue? The tension between the two men was palpable now, a physical thing that made Eleanor's skin prickle with apprehension. David took a step back, his friendly demeanor shifting into something more measured. I was just being neighborly, like Eleanor says. No harm meant. Harm perceived regardless, Samuel replied. I think it's time you left. Eleanor has work to do, and so do I. David looked at Eleanor, as if checking to see if she wanted him to stay. Eleanor gave him a small shake of her head, not because she wanted him to leave, but because she didn't want to be the cause of whatever conflict was brewing between these two men. Safe travels, Mr. Winters, she said politely. David mounted his horse, his easy confidence restored. Eleanor, if you need anything at all, Curtis at the station can pass word to me. I'm in the territory regularly. You won't be forgotten. After he rode away, Eleanor turned to find Samuel watching her with an intensity that she'd never directed at her before. His jaw was clenched, and his hands were balled into fists. "What was that about?" Eleanor asked carefully. "He was trying to court you," Samuel said bluntly. "Did you not notice? Asking you questions, finding reasons to compliment you, then planting seeds about marriage. He was being friendly," Eleanor protested. "He was concerned for my safety. His concern has nothing to do with your safety and everything to do with the fact that you're a woman alone," Samuel said, his voice hard. "You're vulnerable, Eleanor. Out here, that makes you a target." Eleanor felt anger rise in her. "I'm not a child to be protected, Samuel. I'm a grown woman, fully capable of managing my own affairs." "Are you?" Samuel challenged. "Because it seems to me that you're naive about how men think. David Winters sees a woman without a husband and without protection, and he sees opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" Eleanor demanded. Samuel turned away, running a hand through his hair in clear frustration. "To marry you, to gain access to this property, to have a wife who would be grateful enough to overlook whatever shortcomings he might have." "And would that be so terrible?" Eleanor asked, her voice quieter now. "If a man wanted to marry me?" Samuel spun to face her. "Yes, it would be terrible if you married for the wrong reasons. If you married because you believed you had to, or because you were afraid of being alone, or because society told you that a woman needed a husband to be respectable. And what would be the right reasons?" Eleanor asked. Samuel was silent, his chest heaving with emotion he clearly struggled to contain. Finally he said, "Love. You should marry for love, Eleanor. Nothing less." Eleanor stared at him, understanding suddenly why he'd been so angry about David's visit. It wasn't really about David at all. It was about the possibility that Eleanor might leave, might marry someone else, and become unavailable. Samuel didn't want her to go. "I don't know if I'm capable of love," Eleanor said quietly. "I've never experienced it. I don't know what it's supposed to feel like." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw something vulnerable cross his face, a moment of uncertainty, of longing. Then he seemed to lock it away, rebuilding his protective walls. "Love is when someone matters to you more than your own comfort," he said finally. "It's when you can't imagine your life without them, even when you know you should, for your own safety. It's when you want to protect them from every harm, even though you know you can't." "Samuel," Eleanor began, but he held up a hand. "I need to check the fence line on the north side of the property," he said abruptly. "The deer have been getting through. I'll be working there until sunset." He left before Eleanor could respond, and she watched him go with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Samuel had revealed something of himself in that moment, something he'd been trying to hide. The question was what she was going to do with that knowledge. Over the next several days, Samuel's demeanor changed. He was distant again, professional in a way he hadn't been since those first weeks when he was teaching her the basic tasks of ranch life. He came to work because the property needed maintaining, but he no longer lingered after the tasks were completed. He didn't sit with Eleanor during meals. He didn't watch her with that particular intensity that made her feel seen. Eleanor realized she missed it. That intensity, that concern, that sense that she mattered to him. She understood now that she cared for him, probably had been caring for him for weeks without consciously admitting it. The realization terrified her because it made her vulnerable in ways she hadn't been before. One evening, as Eleanor was preparing dinner, she made a decision. She prepared extra food and packed it carefully in a basket. Then, as the sun was setting, she walked to Samuel's property. His cabin was smaller than hers, more utilitarian, with none of the touches that Eleanor had added to her own home. Samuel was sitting on his porch, mending a piece of tack when she arrived. He stood immediately, his expression guarded. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? It's nearly dark." "I brought dinner," she said, holding up the basket. "You've been maintaining a distance, and I understand why." But I don't want you to. I don't want you to be my neighbor from a polite distance. I want you to be my—" She paused, uncertain of the word. "My friend. My real friend, not a polite acquaintance." Samuel looked at the basket, then at her face. "Eleanor, that's not wise. David Winters isn't the only one who's noticed you're living alone. There's talk, and it's only going to get worse if you spend time at my cabin." "Let them talk," Eleanor said firmly. "I didn't come all this way to live my life according to what others think is proper. I came here to build something real. And you're real, Samuel. The work we do together is real. The partnership we've formed is real. I'm not going to pretend otherwise because some townspeople might disapprove." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come inside. We'll eat together." And as Eleanor followed him into his cabin, she understood that something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer simply neighbors maintaining a careful distance. They were becoming something else, something that didn't yet have a name, but felt inevitable and terrifying in equal measure. The question was whether they would have the courage to acknowledge it. The summer deepened into late July, and Eleanor found herself spending increasingly more time at Samuel's cabin than at her own. It began, innocently enough. She would cook dinner and bring it to him, and they would eat together on his porch, watching the mountains turn golden in the fading light. Then it became a regular arrangement, an expectation neither of them explicitly stated, but both understood. Samuel's cabin transformed. Gradually, Eleanor brought a small lamp from her place, and they set it on the table where they worked together in the evenings, Eleanor mending clothes while Samuel cleaned and repaired his equipment. They spoke little, but the silence was companionable, full of an ease that Eleanor had never experienced with another person. One night in early August, as Eleanor was preparing to leave and return to her own cabin before full darkness fell, Samuel stopped her. "Stay," he said simply. "It's late. The path between here and your place is dangerous in the dark. There's a guest room. You can stay the night and leave in the morning." Eleanor knew what he was suggesting and what he wasn't suggesting. Samuel was offering her shelter and nothing more, despite the intimacy that had been building between them for weeks. She appreciated the restraint, the respect for propriety, even as it frustrated her. "All right," she agreed. The guest room was sparse but clean. Eleanor lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the mountain night, the wind through the pines, the distant call of a night bird, the settling sounds of the old cabin. She could hear Samuel moving about in the main room, preparing for sleep. The proximity and distance of him, so close yet separate, made her heart ache with an emotion she was beginning to recognize as love. In the morning, Eleanor woke to find Samuel had prepared breakfast. It was simple, eggs and bread and coffee, but the act of him doing it for her felt significant. They ate without speaking much, but when Eleanor stood to leave, Samuel took her hand. "Eleanor," he said, and she heard uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." Eleanor nodded, her heart beginning to race. "I came to this territory to escape," Samuel began. "After Catherine died, I didn't want to see people, didn't want to be reminded of loss. I built this cabin, created this life alone, and I told myself I was content, but I was lying. I was just numb." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Then you arrived. You showed up in this place like some kind of answer to a prayer I didn't know I was praying. And slowly, without meaning to, I started to feel again." Eleanor squeezed his hand, wanting to speak, but remembering his request for silence. "I know what people are saying in town," Samuel continued. "I know they're calling you my mistress, calling you shameless for spending time here. I know they're disapproving and scandalous. But Eleanor, I don't care what they're saying. What I care about is what you want. What I care about is whether you want to stay here, with me, as more than just a neighbor sharing property." He stopped, and Eleanor understood he'd finished, that this was her moment to respond. "I came to Wyoming to escape my small life," Eleanor said. I thought I was coming to marry Nathaniel, to find security through another person, but what I found with you is different. I found myself, I found that I'm capable and strong, and that I can build something real with my own hands. And yes, I found love. She took a breath. But Samuel, I need to know that you're not asking me to marry you because you're afraid I'll leave, or because you feel obligated to protect me. I need to know that you're asking because you actually want to build a life with me. Samuel's expression softened into something Eleanor had never quite seen before. Vulnerability and certainty mixed together. I'm not afraid you'll leave, he said. I know you're capable of leaving any time you choose. But Eleanor, I'm terrified of you leaving. I'm terrified of going back to being numb. And yes, I want to protect you, but not because I think you're weak. I want to protect you because you matter to me more than anything in this world. He pulled a small box from his pocket, worn leather, clearly old. This was going to be Catherine's. I've carried it for 5 years, unable to let it go, but unable to use it. I want you to have it. Not out of obligation or propriety, but because I can't imagine my future without you in it. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring silver with a small diamond that caught the morning light. Eleanor Hartley, will you marry me? Not because Nathaniel died and left you property, not because we need to silence gossip, but because I love you, and I want to build a real life with you right here for as long as we both shall live. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she realized she was crying. Yes, she said, yes, I will marry you. Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, and Eleanor marveled at how perfect it felt, as if it had always belonged there. The problem, they discovered, was what to do about the rest of the world. When Curtis at the station heard about their engagement, he was genuinely happy for them and immediately spread the news. That was how Eleanor learned what the town had been saying. Margaret Hawthorne, a woman Eleanor had never met, who was apparently a distant cousin of Nathaniel's, came to the property with 2 other women from the community. We wanted to be sure you're being treated properly, Margaret said, her expression suggesting she had her doubts. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of Eleanor's appearance and the cabin's furnishings. We've heard concerning rumours about your arrangement with Samuel Hawthorne. Eleanor stood straighter, refusing to appear defensive. There's nothing concerning about my arrangement with Samuel. We're engaged to be married. The 3 women exchanged glances. That's what we heard. Another woman, Sarah, if Eleanor remembered correctly, said, That's actually why we're here. We wanted to offer you the opportunity to have the wedding in town, at the church, with the community present. It would silence some of the talk. Eleanor understood what they weren't saying directly. They wanted the wedding to be public, witnessed, and proper, because they didn't trust that Eleanor and Samuel had maintained propriety. They wanted to ensure that Eleanor was actually a respectable bride-to-be, and not some frontier woman taking advantage of a lonely man. I appreciate the offer, Eleanor said carefully, but Samuel and I haven't discussed the details yet. When we do, we'll let the community know our plans. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Miss Hartley, I knew Nathaniel. He was a good man with grand ideas about frontier life, but he wasn't practical. He ordered a bride from Philadelphia like he was ordering supplies from a catalogue, and it nearly ruined his reputation. I would hate to see his brother make similar mistakes. There was something almost kind in Margaret's warning, Eleanor realized. She wasn't being deliberately cruel. She genuinely believed she was offering good advice. Nathaniel and I would have been strangers, Eleanor said. I appreciated his kindness in writing to me, but I never knew him. What I've built with Samuel is real. We work together, we understand each other, and yes, we love each other. I don't believe there's anything unrespectable about that. After the women left, Eleanor found herself anxious in a way she hadn't been since those first days of arriving in Wyoming. She understood now that while she and Samuel had created a world that felt complete and real, they couldn't entirely escape the world's judgment. They had to decide whether to defy it or accommodate it. Samuel was waiting for her when she arrived at his cabin that evening. He'd apparently heard about Margaret's visit from Curtis. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I should have anticipated this. I should have prepared you for their judgment." "I can handle judgment," Eleanor said. "But Samuel, I'm wondering if we should consider what they're suggesting, a proper wedding in town with the community present. It might make things easier." Samuel's expression darkened. "You want to marry in town? With all those people watching, judging?" "No," Eleanor said honestly. "I want to marry you, somewhere quiet, somewhere that means something to us. But I'm also practical, and I understand that propriety has value. It might make our life here easier if we're seen as respectable." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "What matters to me," he said finally, "is that we're married. The location doesn't matter to me, but if a proper wedding in town will make you happier, will make you feel more secure, then I'll do it." "Even though you hate crowds?" Eleanor asked. "Even though you came to the mountains to escape society?" "Even though," Samuel confirmed, "because what I discovered when you arrived is that I hate isolation more than I hate crowds. And if a wedding in town will give us peace and allow us to be accepted by the community, then it's worth my discomfort." Eleanor moved to him and kissed him, pouring into that kiss everything she felt for him, gratitude and love, and the recognition that he was willing to change who he was, at least partially, because she mattered to him. The wedding was set for September 1st, which gave them a month to prepare. Eleanor found herself back in town more frequently, working with Margaret and the other women to arrange the details. She discovered that Margaret, despite her stern exterior, had a surprising sense of humor and a genuine care for ensuring things were done well. "You're not what I expected," Margaret told Eleanor as they were arranging flowers at the church. "Nathaniel wrote about having a mail-order bride coming, and I thought it was foolish. But you're capable and intelligent, and you genuinely care about Samuel. That matters." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "I care about this community too, I think. It's strange I came here expecting to build a life with Nathaniel, but instead I've built a life with Samuel and with all of you. It's not what I planned, but it's better." As September approached, Eleanor moved her belongings to Samuel's cabin. Her cabin, Nathaniel's cabin, was left in care of the community, with the understanding that it might be used as shelter for travelers or others in need. Eleanor found herself oddly at peace with this decision. The property had served its purpose in her life. It had been a shelter, a place to learn and grow. Now she was ready to move forward into the next chapter. The night before the wedding, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in Samuel's cabin, their cabin now, though it still felt strange to think of it that way, and listened to the sounds of the mountain night. Tomorrow she would stand in front of the community and make vows to a man she'd known for less than 6 months, but who had become essential to her existence. Samuel found her on the porch in the pre-dawn darkness. "Nervous?" he asked, settling beside her. "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "What if this is a mistake? What if the feelings we have for each other are just because we're isolated together? What if we get out into real society and discover we don't actually know each other?" Samuel took her hand. "We might discover that. But Eleanor, I don't think we will. I think we know each other better than most people know their spouses after years of marriage. We've built something real. But if you're having second thoughts, if you want to stop this—" "I don't," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm terrified, but I don't have doubts. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to face whatever comes next together." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "Then that's what we'll do." As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor understood that her life had truly transformed. The mail-order bride who arrived expecting to marry one man had instead found another. The woman who came seeking security through marriage had instead found herself through partnership and work, and the mountain man who thought he wanted nothing to do with people, had discovered that one person could change everything. The future was still uncertain, but it was theirs to build together. The church in Redemption Creek was small, built from rough-hewn logs with a simple steeple that pointed toward the vast Wyoming sky. Eleanor had attended only once since arriving in the territory, during one of her early visits to town with Samuel, and the interior hadn't changed. Wooden pews, simple altar, and windows that allowed the mountain light to flood the space with clarity. On the morning of September 1st, Eleanor stood in the vestry room while Margaret and Sarah helped her prepare. She wore a dress that wasn't white. There hadn't been time to commission something entirely new, but it was her best dress, a pale cream wool that Margaret had helped her alter to be wedding appropriate. Her dark hair was pinned up with small flowers woven through the pins, a concession to tradition that still felt somewhat rebellious. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, adjusting the flowers. Nathaniel would have been proud, I think, seeing his property used well and his brother finding happiness. Eleanor met Sarah's eyes in the small mirror they'd propped on the table. "Do you think people will accept this marriage? Or will they always see me as the scandalous mail-order bride?" Margaret, adjusting the hem of Eleanor's dress, answered firmly, "People will accept what they see proven to them every day. They'll see a woman who works hard, who's contributed to this community, who loves a man genuinely. That matters more than gossip." She stood, surveying her work. "You're ready." The church was full. Eleanor had expected perhaps 30 people. There were nearly 80. Apparently, news of the wedding had spread throughout the surrounding ranches and settlements, and people were curious to see the woman who'd captured the mountain man's heart. Samuel waited at the altar with the pastor, a kind-faced man named Reverend Collins. Eleanor could see tension in Samuel's shoulders, could read his discomfort in the way he held himself. But when the music began and Eleanor appeared in the doorway, she watched his entire expression transform. The tension released, replaced by something so open and vulnerable that Eleanor felt tears prickle her eyes. He was seeing her, she realized. Not the mail-order bride or the orphaned woman or the capable worker. He was seeing Eleanor, the woman he loved, and that recognition was written plainly across his face. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Collins spoke about commitment and partnership, about the sacred nature of marriage, about two people choosing to build a life together in this harsh and beautiful frontier. Eleanor spoke her vows clearly, her voice steady, even as her hands trembled. Samuel's voice was quieter, but just as certain. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel leaned down and kissed her, not a chaste kiss for the church, but a real kiss that spoke of passion held in careful check. Eleanor heard gasps from some of the congregation, followed by the sound of people laughing and clapping. The reception was held at the church social hall, a simple space that had been decorated with autumn flowers and streamers. People brought food, and there was music from a fiddler who'd apparently come specifically for the event. Eleanor moved through the crowd in a daze, still adjusting to the reality of being Samuel's wife, being called Mrs. Hawthorne. David Winters appeared at one point, congratulating her sincerely. "I'm glad you found happiness here," he said. "Samuel's a lucky man." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, and she found she meant it without reservation. Whatever she might have felt for David, potential it paled in comparison to what she'd found with Samuel. Margaret approached later, drawing Eleanor aside. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "Nathaniel left. Instructions with Curtis about his property. He wanted it to be yours for a year, to give you security and choices. After that, it's to be sold, and the proceeds go to establish a small school in Redemption Creek." Margaret smiled. "He wanted education available for the children in this territory. He wanted to build something that would last beyond his own life." Eleanor felt emotion surge through her at this revelation. Nathaniel, the man she'd never truly known, had made provisions not just for her survival, but for the community's future. "He was a good man," she said quietly. "He was," Margaret agreed. "And so is Samuel, but in different ways. Nathaniel dreamed about building community. Samuel is learning that community isn't something to fear, but something to be part of. As evening fell and people began to depart, Samuel pulled Eleanor aside. "Come," he said. "I have something to show you." He led her outside to a horse, saddled and waiting. "We're leaving?" Eleanor asked in surprise. "Not for long, just for one night. I wanted to show you something before winter comes." They rode higher into the mountains than Eleanor had ever been, following a trail that seemed to exist only in Samuel's knowledge. The sun was setting, painting the world in shades of orange and purple, and Eleanor found herself holding her breath at the beauty of it. Finally, they reached a high meadow, ringed with aspen trees, their leaves just beginning to turn gold. In the center of the meadow was a small cabin, not nearly as weathered as Samuel's, but clearly old, clearly abandoned. "What is this place?" Eleanor asked. "It belonged to someone I knew a long time ago," Samuel said. "Before I came to Redemption Creek, I worked for a rancher up here." This was his shelter cabin, used during the high season when the cattle grazed in the mountains. Samuel dismounted and helped Eleanor down. "But it's private. Nobody comes here anymore. I thought we might spend our wedding night here." Eleanor looked at the cabin, understanding what he was offering, not just shelter for the night, but a place completely separate from the world, where they could be entirely alone together. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly clean. Samuel had clearly prepared it. There was wood stacked beside a small stove, blankets on a narrow bed, a table with a lamp. It was sparse, but welcoming. "Samuel," Eleanor said softly, "this is perfect." As darkness fell outside, they built a fire in the stove and sat together, watching the flames. Eleanor's wedding dress felt impractical and constraining, and after a while, Samuel helped her unlace the back, revealing the simpler clothing she wore underneath. She changed into a nightgown that Margaret had quietly provided, and Samuel gave her privacy to do so. When Eleanor emerged, Samuel had removed his formal clothes and wore simple trousers and a shirt. They stood facing each other, and Eleanor realized that this moment, crossing from courtship into marriage, into physical intimacy, was as significant as any moment in her life. "I've never done this before," Eleanor said quietly. "I know nothing about what's expected of me." "Neither have I," Samuel admitted. "Not really. Catherine and I, we were never given the chance to explore this together." He took Eleanor's hand. "But Eleanor, I don't need experience. I just need you. I need to know that you're as scared and uncertain as I am, and that we're doing this together anyway." Eleanor nodded and moved closer to him. "I'm terrified," she whispered, "but not of you. Never of you." They moved together with a kind of tentative certainty, learning each other's bodies, learning what brought pleasure and what brought comfort. It wasn't the passionate, experienced coupling Eleanor might have imagined from reading romance novels, but it was real and intimate and profoundly moving. It was two people learning to trust each other completely. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Eleanor's head resting on Samuel's chest, his arm wrapped around her. Outside the small cabin, the wind rustled through the aspen trees, and Eleanor had never felt more at peace. "Thank you," Samuel said into the darkness. "For what?" Eleanor asked. "For coming here. For staying. For choosing me even when it wasn't practical or easy." He paused. "For saving me, even though I didn't know I needed saving." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him in the faint light from the dying fire. "You saved me too," she said. "You gave me a place to belong when I had nowhere. You showed me that I was capable of more than I thought possible. You loved me when I didn't know if I was worthy of love." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Eleanor dreamed of fields of wild flowers and mountains touching the sky. In the morning, they woke to the sound of birds singing in the aspen trees. Samuel made coffee on the small stove, and they sat together watching the sunrise paint the meadow in shades of gold. "We should talk about the future," Samuel said as they prepared to leave, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. "I mean, What do you want to do with Nathaniel's property? Margaret mentioned the school initiative. Would you want to be part of that? Or would you rather return to your own cabin and maintain it separately? Eleanor considered the question. She'd grown attached to the cabin that Nathaniel built, to the garden she'd planted there. But she also understood that clinging to it would be clinging to a past that no longer defined her. I think, Eleanor said slowly, that I'd like to help with the school, and perhaps we could use Nathaniel's cabin as a meeting place for the community, somewhere neutral where people could gather. It seems like what Nathaniel would have wanted. Samuel smiled. That's generous. That's kind. It's practical, Eleanor corrected. We don't need two cabins. We don't need to maintain Nathaniel's property separately. But the community does need a place to gather, and the school needs support. This way, Nathaniel's legacy continues, and we build something together. As they rode back down the mountain toward Redemption Creek, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness. The mail-order bride had become a wife. The lonely mountain man had become part of a community. The future that had seemed so uncertain when Eleanor first stepped off the stagecoach was now becoming clear. It was a future of building, of contribution, of genuine partnership. The mountains surrounded them as they rode, vast and ancient and unchanging. But Eleanor understood that while the landscape remained constant, the people within it were always changing, always growing, always finding new ways to love and serve and build together. She reached over and took Samuel's hand, and he squeezed it in return. No words were necessary. They both understood that whatever lay ahead, the harsh winters, the difficult work, the challenges of frontier life, they would face it together. That was what marriage meant. Not romantic perfection or the absence of struggle. It meant choosing every day to stand beside another person and face whatever came. Eleanor had come to Wyoming as a mail-order bride, seeking security and escape. She had found something far more valuable, genuine love, hard-won and fiercely protected. She had found home not in a location but in a person, in the choice to build something real with a man who had been broken by loss but was learning to live again. The story of Eleanor and Samuel was just beginning. October arrived with a suddenness that took Eleanor's breath away. The aspens that had been golden just weeks before turned brown almost overnight. The temperature dropped so severely that frost formed on the inside of the cabin windows, and the animals huddled together in the barn seeking warmth. Samuel had been preparing for months, but Eleanor understood now that preparation could never quite equal the reality of winter in the high country. They had firewood stacked taller than a man, food preserved in the root cellar, animals sheltered and fed. But winter was relentless, indifferent to human preparation. The first major storm came in mid-October, earlier than Samuel had predicted. Eleanor woke to the sound of wind that seemed almost sentient in its fury, shaking the cabin's log walls and testing every seal and joint. Samuel was already awake, moving about with the quiet competence that Eleanor had come to recognize. "How long will it last?" Eleanor asked, pulling on warm clothes. 3 days, maybe 4, Samuel said. "We'll need to check the animals every few hours to make sure they have water and food. The wind will pile snow against the barn doors, so we'll need to clear it." Eleanor had experienced spring snow in Philadelphia, gentle and temporary. This was different. This was a genuine assault, a reminder that nature operated on, principles that had nothing to do with human comfort or planning. For 3 days, they worked almost continuously, venturing out into the storm for brief periods to care for the animals, then returning to the cabin to warm themselves. Eleanor's hands went numb despite gloves. Her face burned with cold that felt almost like heat. But the animals were fed, and the cabin remained secure. When the storm finally passed, leaving behind mountains of snow and a silence so profound it seemed impossible that the world had just been in such violent motion, Eleanor found herself transformed by the experience. She wasn't afraid of winter anymore. Fear implied uncertainty, and she now understood clearly what winter required: work, vigilance, persistence. November brought a different kind of challenge. Eleanor was in the root cellar, checking their preserved food stores and organizing them for efficient use through the winter, when she discovered the letters. They were in a wooden box buried behind some old tools, and at first Eleanor didn't understand what she was looking at. Then she recognized Nathaniel's handwriting. The letters were addressed to Samuel. Eleanor knew she shouldn't read them. They were clearly private correspondence, but she was drawn to the first one, written just months before Nathaniel's death. "Samuel, I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to show you this letter, but I need to write it regardless. I need to say the things I've never been able to say aloud. I know you blame me for leaving. I know you think I abandoned you when Father died, choosing escape over staying to help you through your grief. But Samuel, I was drowning. The ranch held nothing but memories of Father's expectations and your silent disapproval of my dreams. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand that sometimes people break in different ways. You broke inward, becoming harder and more isolated. I broke outward, fleeing towards something new, even though I didn't know what that something was. The mail-order bride idea came from desperation, not grand planning. I wanted to believe that if I built something, if I created a life separate from you and separate from the past, that I could finally feel at peace. I don't know if that would have happened. I'll never know. But I wanted you to know that my seeking distance from you wasn't rejection. It was survival." Eleanor set the letter down with trembling hands. She had known only fragments of Samuel and Nathaniel's history, and those fragments had suggested a straightforward estrangement. But this letter suggested something more complicated: two men broken by grief, expressing that brokenness in opposite directions. There were 6 more letters, each one progressively darker in tone. In the final letter, written what must have been mere days before Nathaniel's death, he wrote, "I'm sick, Samuel, and I don't think I'm going to recover. The fever won't break, and the doctor says my lungs are filling with fluid. I want to see you. I want to tell you in person that I'm sorry, but I don't have the strength to ride to your property, and I know you won't come to me. So instead, I'll leave this letter to be found after I'm gone, and I'll hope that somehow my words will reach you when my voice cannot. You were always the stronger one. You were always the one who could endure. I was the dreamer, the one who needed escape. But Samuel, I understand now that escape doesn't work. Death comes regardless of whether you're running towards something or away from something. I'm going to die having never truly made peace with my brother. That's my deepest regret." Eleanor was crying by the time she finished the last letter. She understood now why Samuel had been so resistant to her presence, why he'd chosen isolation for 5 years. He'd been trying to escape a grief so profound that it had fractured his family and left him alone with guilt and regret. She held the letters, carefully, unsure what to do with them. These were Samuel's to decide about, not hers to process privately. She placed them back in the box and climbed out of the root cellar, seeking her husband. She found him in the barn, repairing a section of wall that had been damaged by the earlier storm. He looked up when she entered, his expression immediately reading something in her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. Eleanor held out the box. "I found these in the root cellar while organizing stores. They're letters from Nathaniel. I read one I shouldn't have. I'm sorry, but I think you should read them all." Samuel's face went very still. He set down his tools slowly and took the box from Eleanor's hands. For a long moment he simply stared at it. "I've been avoiding going through his things," Samuel said finally. "Curtis told me there were letters, but I couldn't face them. I was afraid of what they would say. They say that he loved you," Eleanor said softly, "that he was sorry for leaving, that he wanted peace with you before he died." Samuel opened the box and pulled out the top letter. His hands shook as he read it. Eleanor saw tears form in his eyes, the first time she'd witnessed him cry. "I was so angry with him," Samuel said, his voice rough, "for leaving after Father died, for choosing to build something new rather than stay and grieve with me. I thought his engagement to you meant he was happy, that he'd moved on easily, that he didn't care about the family we'd lost." He looked at Eleanor. "But he was struggling. He was trying to build something that might make him feel less broken. Like you were trying to build isolation to feel less broken," Eleanor said gently. Samuel nodded, understanding the parallel. He sat down on a hay bale and read through all the letters, his shoulders gradually sagging under the weight of what Nathaniel had needed to say. When he finished, he looked at Eleanor with an expression of such profound sadness that she moved to him immediately, wrapping her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "I can't apologize to him," Samuel said. "He's gone, and I can never tell him that I forgive him, that I understand why he left, that his leaving wasn't a rejection of me." "But you can honor what he tried to build," Eleanor said. "You can support the school initiative. You can be part of the community that he dreamed about creating. You can live in a way that acknowledges his legacy, even if he can't know about it." Samuel turned to face her. "How did you become so wise?" he asked. "I'm not wise," Eleanor said. "I'm just a woman who arrived here completely lost and discovered that sometimes the best thing you can do is move forward. That sometimes honoring the dead means living well for the living." Over the following days, Samuel worked through his grief with a kind of quiet determination. He shared Nathaniel's letters with Margaret and with Curtis, allowing the community to understand. The young man who had wanted to build something but had died before he could see it flourish. Margaret organized a small memorial service in November, not for Nathaniel's death itself, which had occurred months before Eleanor arrived, but for his dreams and his vision. People from the community shared memories of the few times they'd met him, spoke about the school that would be built using the land he'd left, discussed how his vision was becoming reality. Samuel attended with Eleanor beside him, and for the first time he seemed to be making peace with his brother's departure and death. He wasn't smiling, exactly, but the rigid tension that usually characterized his expression had softened. After the service, Margaret pulled Eleanor aside while Samuel was speaking with Curtis about practical matters regarding the property. "He needed that," Margaret said. "He needed to understand that Nathaniel wasn't rejecting him, that people can love each other and still make different choices." "He's learning," Eleanor agreed. "Slowly." "You're good for him," Margaret observed. "You came here as a stranger, and instead of being intimidated by his walls, you simply started building beside him rather than trying to tear the walls down. That's a kind of wisdom that can't be taught." As November deepened and December approached, Eleanor found herself settling into a different kind of routine than the frantic preparation of the earlier months. The house was secure, the animals were cared for, the food stores were adequate. Now came the work of waiting, of maintaining, of enduring. She and Samuel established patterns that suited the shortened winter days. They would wake before dawn, tend the animals, then spend the long hours indoors, working on projects that didn't require outdoor labor. Samuel taught Eleanor how to work leather, showing her the skills that had been passed down to him by his father. Eleanor taught Samuel to read more carefully, to engage with the few books they had in a way that went beyond simple entertainment. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the cabin windows and the fire crackled in the stove, Eleanor said to Samuel, "Do you think you'll ever want to go back? Back to Philadelphia, or to wherever your life was before you came here?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "Philadelphia represents everything I was trying to escape, expectation and judgment and the weight of family legacy. But Wyoming," he gestured toward the window, toward the mountains beyond. "Wyoming is where I discovered that isolation isn't the same as peace, where I learned that peace comes from connection, from building something with another person." "And if I hadn't come," Eleanor asked, "if the stagecoach had never arrived, would you still have found that?" "Probably not," Samuel admitted. "I was settled into my isolation. I'd convinced myself it was what I wanted. You disrupted that certainty, and at first I resented it. But, Eleanor, I'm grateful for that disruption. I'm grateful for you." Eleanor moved closer to him, and they sat together in the warmth of the cabin while the winter night deepened outside. She thought about how dramatically her life had changed in the span of just a few months. She'd arrived as a mail-order bride to one man and had become the wife of another. She'd gone from having nothing to having everything: a home, a husband, a community, a purpose. But more than that, she'd gone from being someone trying to escape her small life to being someone actively building something meaningful with another person. The mail-order bride arrangement that had seemed so modern and progressive when she'd first responded to Nathaniel's letter had instead led her to something far more traditional: genuine partnership, genuine love, genuine commitment. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it didn't feel bitter. It felt like grace. As the year turned toward its end and the deepest part of winter approached, Eleanor knew that the challenges ahead would be significant. But she also knew that she and Samuel would face them together, having learned through loss and disruption and genuine vulnerability how to truly see each other. That knowledge was worth more than any security the original mail-order bride arrangement could have offered. December brought the deepest cold yet, temperatures so severe that venturing outside required meticulous preparation and careful timing. Eleanor and Samuel had established a rhythm of essential work, only feeding and watering animals, gathering firewood, the bare minimum required to maintain their survival. It was during this period of relative inactivity that Eleanor first noticed something was different. Her body was changing in ways that she initially attributed to the stress of winter, to the physical demands of frontier life. She felt nauseated in the mornings, though it passed quickly. She felt exhausted in ways that seemed disproportionate to the work she was doing. Her breasts were tender and swollen. Eleanor had grown up with a mother who died when she was young, had no sisters to confide in, and had only the barest understanding of the female body's functions. But she was intelligent enough to recognize the pattern. She'd read medical texts. She'd paid attention when older women at the boarding house had discussed their pregnancies. She was carrying Samuel's child. The realization struck her one morning as she was attempting to prepare breakfast and found the smell of salt pork, absolutely revolting food she'd previously enjoyed, without hesitation. She sat down heavily at the table, one hand pressed to her stomach, and tried to process what this meant. A baby. Here, in this cabin, in this harsh territory. With winter still months away from ending, Eleanor waited 3 days before telling Samuel. 3 days of internal processing, of trying to understand her own feelings about this development. She'd never imagined becoming a mother. Her life had been focused on survival, first in Philadelphia as an orphaned woman with limited prospects, then in Wyoming as a mail-order bride, adapting to a new life. But as she considered the reality of carrying Samuel's child, Eleanor discovered that alongside the fear was something else: hope. This child would be half of Samuel, his strength, his steadiness, his quiet wisdom. This child would be half of her determination, her adaptability, her capacity for building. She chose to tell him in the evening, when they were sitting by the fire with the day's work finished. Samuel was mending a bridle, his hands moving with practiced competence, and Eleanor was knitting a skill that Margaret had taught her, and one that now felt almost prophetic given what she was about to share. "Samuel," Eleanor said, and he looked up immediately, reading something in her tone. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then he set down the bridle and crossed to her, kneeling in front of her chair. "Are you certain?" he asked. "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor," Eleanor confirmed. "It's been over 2 months since we married. I haven't bled since before the wedding. I'm nauseated, exhausted, and my body is changing." "The signs are clear." Samuel reached out and placed his hand on Eleanor's still flat stomach, as if he could feel the presence of the child within. "How long until the baby comes?" "If my calculations are correct," July, Eleanor said. Mid to late July. She watched Samuel's face, trying to read his reaction. They hadn't discussed children, there hadn't been time for that conversation. She'd assumed, at least until recently, that they would have years before needing to address the question of offspring. That's dangerous, Samuel said finally, his voice tight. Summer is when illness spreads. The doctor will be difficult to reach if something goes wrong. Many women have babies, Eleanor said, gently. It's not always dangerous. I'm healthy, strong. There's no reason to believe something will go wrong. Catherine was healthy, Samuel said quietly, and my mother was healthy. Both of them died despite that fact. Eleanor understood. Samuel had lost both his mother, she realized suddenly that she didn't know when or how, and his fiancée to complications related to childbirth or illness surrounding it. No wonder he was frightened. Samuel, Eleanor said, taking his hand. I'm not Catherine. I'm not your mother. I'm Eleanor, and I'm stubborn and capable and determined to survive. I'm going to give you this child, and I'm going to survive doing it. Samuel pulled her from the chair and held her against him, and Eleanor felt him trembling slightly. Don't make promises you can't keep, he said into her hair. I can keep this one, Eleanor replied firmly, because I have too much to lose if I don't. I have you. I have this home. I have a future I've fought too hard to build to. Let it be taken from me. Over the following days and weeks, Eleanor and Samuel adjusted to the reality of impending parenthood. Samuel's fear gradually transformed into careful planning. He began asking questions about what Eleanor needed, what precautions should be taken, how to best prepare for a birth in July. In January, Margaret made a special trip to the cabin despite the winter conditions, carrying supplies and information. She'd brought a book on childbirth, written by a doctor, and she and Eleanor spent an afternoon going through it together, while Samuel listened from the other side of the cabin, pretending to work, but clearly paying attention to every word. I'm going to insist that we bring Dr. Hartley from Denver, Margaret said. He's the best physician in the territory, and he owes me a favor. I'll arrange for him to be here well before July. Won't that be incredibly expensive? Eleanor asked, concerned about the financial implications. Nathaniel's estate is substantial, Margaret said, and more importantly, Samuel's been profitable in his ranching. You won't be destitute. You'll be able to afford proper care for this birth. After Margaret left, Eleanor found herself thinking about Nathaniel again, the brother-in-law she'd never met, but whose generosity and vision continued to affect her life. His letters, his property, his foresight in building a cabin that could shelter a growing family, all of it pointed to a man who, despite his struggles with Samuel, had believed in the future. The baby should be a boy, Samuel said one evening in February as they were sitting together watching the fire. I want to pass my name to another generation. I want there to be another Samuel Hawthorne who understands this land, who knows how to survive here. And if it's a girl, Eleanor asked, then she'll be strong like her mother, Samuel said simply, and she'll be able to choose her own path rather than having it chosen for her. Eleanor smiled. At that, Samuel's feminism wasn't expressed in grand political terms, but it was genuine, born from his observation of Eleanor's capabilities and determination. As spring approached and the snow began to melt, Eleanor's pregnancy became increasingly obvious. Her body expanded, her energy fluctuated, and her frame of mind shifted between moments of profound contentment and moments of anxiety about what was coming. Curtis brought news from town in March. Apparently the community was buzzing with speculation about the baby. Most people were supportive, but there were whispers questioning whether Eleanor, as a mail-order bride, would be capable of motherhood. Some people wondered if a woman who'd come west for such unconventional reasons could be trusted with a child. Eleanor refused to let these whispers disturb her, but she noticed that Margaret seemed particularly defensive when she visited, making pointed comments about Eleanor's competence and the community's tendency toward unfounded judgment. In April, as the weather warmed and the mountains began to green, Eleanor experienced a moment of profound connection to the land that had become her home. She stood on the porch of the cabin, one hand on her swollen belly, and looked out at the mountains that had seemed so terrifying and foreign when she'd first arrived. Now, they felt like a welcoming embrace. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of tea. "I'm thinking about how much I've changed," Eleanor said. "How different I am from the woman who stepped off that stagecoach last summer." "I was so afraid, Samuel. Afraid of the landscape, afraid of being alone, afraid of being judged. And now I'm carrying our child, planning for a future here, and I'm not afraid anymore." "You should still be afraid sometimes," Samuel said. "Fear keeps us careful. But Eleanor, you've proven yourself capable of far more than you ever believed possible." As the spring deepened and May arrived, bringing with it warmth and the explosion of wildflowers across the mountains, Eleanor found herself preparing both physically and mentally for the birth. Margaret had provided supplies, linens, herbs, things that would be needed. The community had collectively decided to help women from Redemption Creek, took turns staying with Eleanor, teaching her the final preparations, sharing their own birthing experiences. In June, Samuel rode to Denver to meet with Dr. Hartley and confirm his arrival in early July. He returned with the doctor's assurance that he would be present for the birth, and also with concerns. "The doctor asked if you'd experienced any complications," Samuel told Eleanor carefully. "Any bleeding, any severe pain, anything unusual?" "Nothing," Eleanor assured him. "I feel strong. I feel healthy. The baby moves constantly. I've been feeling it for weeks now. Everything feels normal." But even as Eleanor said the words, she felt a flutter of anxiety. She understood that childbirth was inherently dangerous, that no amount of preparation could completely mitigate risk. She thought of Nathaniel's letters, of Samuel's mother and fiancé, of all the women whose bodies had betrayed them at the moment when their strength mattered most. She pushed those thoughts aside and focused instead on the present moment, on the cabin that Samuel had reinforced and prepared, on the supplies they'd gathered, on the network of community support that had materialized around them. In late June, as Eleanor waited for the birth that would come within days or weeks, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, seeking security. She'd found something far more valuable, genuine partnership with a man who challenged her, supported her, and loved her completely. And now their love was manifesting as new life, growing inside her, preparing to enter this world. One evening, Eleanor sat alone while Samuel was checking on the animals. She placed both hands on her belly and spoke to the child within. "Hello, little one," she said softly. "I know the world you're entering is harsh and unpredictable. I know that frontier life demands strength and resilience. But I want you to know that you're coming into a place of love. Your father and I have built something real here, something meaningful. We've worked hard and we've suffered, but we've also learned that life is most beautiful when shared with another person." She paused, feeling the baby move in response to the vibrations of her voice. "You're going to be born into privilege and challenge both," Eleanor continued. "You'll have security that many frontier children don't have, but you'll also have work and responsibility. I hope you'll choose, as I have chosen, to see those challenges not as burdens, but as opportunities to grow, to become stronger, to build something that matters." Eleanor placed her forehead against her folded hands and made a silent prayer, not to any particular deity, but to whatever force governed existence, hoping that her child would be healthy, that the birth would be safe, that the future she and Samuel had begun to build would continue. The baby would come soon. The mail-order bride's journey was about to enter its most transformative chapter yet, and Eleanor was ready. "Your father summoned me, yet he passed mail," Order Bride explained. Mountain Man responded. Then remained Part 8. The birth and the test July arrived with oppressive heat that made Eleanor uncomfortable in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her due date was July 15th, and as that date approached, she found herself moving slowly, her body heavy and her patience wearing thin. Samuel had become almost obsessively protective, insisting that she rest, that she not exert herself, that she be ready at any moment for labor to begin. Dr. Hartley arrived on July 8th, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and an air of competent pragmatism that Eleanor immediately appreciated. He examined her thoroughly, asked detailed questions about her health, her diet, her energy levels, and declared himself satisfied with her condition. "You're healthy," he told her. "The baby is positioned well. I see no reason to expect complications." But Eleanor could see the worry in Samuel's eyes. She understood that the doctor's assurances couldn't erase the trauma of his past losses. She took his hand one night and said quietly, "I'm going to live through this, Samuel. We're both going to live through this." "How can you be so certain?" he asked. "Because I'm stubborn," Eleanor replied simply. "Because I didn't survive Philadelphia, the stagecoach journey, learning to live in the wilderness and falling in love with a mountain man just to be taken down by childbirth. Because I have too much to live for." Labor began on July 17th in the pre-dawn darkness. Eleanor woke to a sensation of pressure and mild pain, a cramping that was different from anything she'd experienced before. She lay still for several minutes, assessing, understanding that this was truly happening. She woke Samuel quietly. "It's time," she said. What followed was a day and night of increasing intensity. Dr. Hartley arrived within an hour, sent word to Margaret in town, and established himself in the cabin with calm competence. Eleanor moved through the stages of labor with a kind of determined focus, remembering everything the women of the community had told her, reminding herself that her body was designed for this, that countless women before her had done this. Margaret arrived in the afternoon with Sarah and two other women from town, Elena Pritchard and young Emma Collins. They took over the cabin's organization, ensuring that Dr. Hartley had what he needed, keeping water boiling, preparing supplies, and most importantly, providing Eleanor with continuous support. Samuel was relegated to the barn by Margaret's firm insistence. "Men have no place in the birthing chamber," she said not unkindly. "You'll only make Eleanor anxious with your worry." Throughout the evening and into the night, Eleanor labored. The pain was intense, far more intense than she'd anticipated, despite all the warnings. But it was manageable, because it had purpose. Each contraction was moving her closer to meeting her child. Each moment of intensity was temporary, followed by periods of relative rest. At one point, as Eleanor was deep in labor and the pain had become almost overwhelming, she found herself thinking about Nathaniel. She wondered if, somewhere in the universe, he was aware of what was happening. She wondered if he knew that his vision of family and community was continuing through Eleanor and Samuel and the child who was about to be born. "The baby's coming, Doctor," Hartley announced as midnight approached. "Eleanor, on the next contraction, I want you to push with everything you have." Eleanor gathered every ounce of strength and determination she possessed and pushed. She felt her body working in concert with her will, felt the extraordinary effort of bringing new life into the world. The pain peaked, and then the cry of a newborn infant filled the cabin. "It's a girl," Dr. Hartley announced, and Eleanor heard the smile in his voice. "A healthy, beautiful girl." They placed the baby on Eleanor's chest, slick and covered in vernix, her face red and her fists clenched, and Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. This small person, created from her body and Samuel's, was real and alive and perfect. "She has your dark hair," Margaret said, peering over Eleanor's shoulder, "and Samuel's strong chin." Eleanor held her daughter and felt something inside her transform completely. Motherhood wasn't a concept anymore. It was this small, warm weight in her arms, depending entirely on her for survival and comfort. Samuel was allowed into the cabin an hour later, after Eleanor had been cleaned, and the Tuma 7 baby had been wrapped in soft blankets. Eleanor watched his face as he saw their daughter for the first time, watched his expression shift from fear to wonder to overwhelming love. "She's perfect," he whispered, and Eleanor heard tears in his voice. "Eleanor, she's perfect." "We made her," Eleanor said simply. "We made this perfect human being." They named her Catherine, a deliberate choice to honor the fiancé Samuel had lost, to transform his grief into a living memorial. Catherine Hawthorne, born on a July night in a cabin in the Wyoming Territory, to parents who had come together through circumstance, but stayed together through genuine choice. Part 9. The Aftermath and the Test of Strength. The first weeks of motherhood were simultaneously the most challenging and most rewarding of Eleanor's life. Catherine was a demanding infant. She nursed constantly, slept only in short bursts, and seemed to cry with a purpose that Eleanor gradually learned to interpret. Hunger, discomfort, the need to be held. Eleanor had expected to be tired. She hadn't expected exhaustion to penetrate so completely into every aspect of her being. Her body, having just completed the extraordinary work of pregnancy and childbirth, was now being drained by nursing. Her mind, accustomed to the rhythms of ranch work and household management, struggled to adjust to the unpredictable demands of an infant. Samuel handled the ranch work almost entirely, managing tasks that Eleanor would normally have shared. Margaret came regularly to help, teaching Eleanor techniques for managing Catherine, offering encouragement when Eleanor questioned whether she was doing anything right. "Every mother doubts herself," Margaret said one afternoon, as Eleanor expressed concern that Catherine wasn't eating enough. "The first weeks are the hardest. Your body will adapt, Catherine will develop a schedule, and you'll begin to find your rhythm as a mother." In early August, as Eleanor was finally beginning to feel slightly more confident in her parenting, Curtis arrived with news that struck her like a physical blow. David Winters had been killed in an accident on the South Road, thrown from his horse and trampled before anyone could help him. He'd been in the territory less than a week, apparently looking for Eleanor. Eleanor received the news with shock that gradually transformed into guilt. She'd rejected David's interest without cruelty, but she also hadn't maintained friendship or correspondence with him. He'd apparently carried a torch for her all these months, and Eleanor would never know what he'd intended to do or say. "You're not responsible for his actions," Samuel said firmly when he found Eleanor crying in the cabin. "David made his own choices. He traveled here of his own volition. What happened to him was an accident. But if I'd been kinder, if I'd maintained some connection—" "Eleanor," Samuel interrupted gently, "you were honest with him. You told him that you'd chosen me. You weren't cruel. You weren't unkind. You were clear about your heart, and David chose to honor that clarity by leaving." But Eleanor carried the weight of it anyway. She understood, in a way she hadn't before, that simply existing and making choices affected other people's lives. Her decision to stay in Wyoming rather than return to Philadelphia had changed the trajectory of her life. Her choice to marry Samuel had closed doors for other possibilities, and somehow those choices had rippled out into the world in ways she couldn't fully control or predict. That autumn, as Catherine grew and Eleanor's body recovered from the physical ordeal of pregnancy and childbirth, Eleanor experienced a kind of reckoning. She realized that the woman who'd arrived in Redemption Creek as a mail-order bride was genuinely gone, transformed into someone new. She was a mother now, a wife, a member of a community. She had responsibilities that went beyond her own survival and happiness. One evening in September, as Eleanor was nursing Catherine by the fire while Samuel worked on leather repairs nearby, she said to her husband, "I've been thinking about what comes next." "What do you mean?" Samuel asked, looking up. "I mean that we've built this life, the cabin, the ranch, this child." "But it's just the beginning," Eleanor said. "Margaret's been discussing the school that Nathaniel's property will fund, and I've been thinking that maybe I could be involved. Maybe I could teach." Samuel set down his work. "You want to teach?" "I want to build something that lasts," Eleanor said. something that helps not just us, but the community. I came west seeking security, but what I've learned is that real security comes from being part of something larger than yourself, from contributing to the future. You're already doing that, Samuel pointed out. You're raising our daughter, you're maintaining this home. You're part of the community through Margaret and the other women. I know, Eleanor agreed. But I want to do more. I want to use my education, my knowledge. I want to give the children of this territory the opportunity to learn, to grow, to have options beyond what I had. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I knew when I married you that you were ambitious, that you wanted to build something. I'm not surprised that you're already looking beyond what we've accomplished to what's possible next. Does that bother you? Eleanor asked carefully. No, Samuel said. It makes me love you more. Because ambition without selfishness is a rare thing. You're not trying to leave this place or these people. You're trying to improve them. By spring of the following year, Eleanor had worked with Margaret and the community to establish a small schoolhouse on Nathaniel's property. It was a modest building, nothing fancy, but it had space for 20 or 30 children and was equipped with books and supplies. Eleanor began teaching 3 days a week, starting with the simplest subjects: reading, writing, basic arithmetic for children whose ages ranged from 5 to 14. Samuel watched Catherine when Eleanor was teaching, and Eleanor discovered that he'd developed an unexpected gentleness with their daughter, creating games and activities that made her laugh. The school became a gathering place. Parents would sometimes stay to visit while their children learned. Community members began using the space for meetings and celebrations. Nathaniel's vision of community building was finally becoming reality, 15 months after his death and through the efforts of people he'd never met. On a warm afternoon in May, when Catherine was just shy of her first birthday and toddling around on unsteady legs, Eleanor stood in the garden of the cabin and reflected on her journey. The young woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach in Redemption Creek had been seeking escape and security. She'd found something far different. Not escape, but engagement. Not security through dependence, but security through capability and community. Margaret visited that afternoon, bringing supplies and news from town. As she and Eleanor sat on the porch watching Catherine play in the grass, with Samuel supervising from the barn, visible but deliberately giving them privacy, Margaret said, I've been thinking about something for a while, and I wanted to mention it to you. What's that? Eleanor asked. I want to formally establish the Hawthorne School, Margaret said, named for both Nathaniel and Samuel, to honor both their legacies. And I want you to be the permanent director, Eleanor. Not just a teacher, but someone who helps design the curriculum, who trains other teachers, who ensures that children in this territory get real education. Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. Margaret, I'm honored, but I want to discuss it with Samuel first. Of course, Margaret agreed. But Eleanor, I wanted you to know that the community sees you. We see who you are not as the mail-order bride who arrived under scandalous circumstances, but as a woman who's built something real. You've proven yourself 100 times over. That evening, Eleanor shared Margaret's offer with Samuel. They sat on the porch after Catherine had been put to bed, watching the mountains turn purple as the sun set. Do you want to do this? Samuel asked. Yes, Eleanor said, but only if it doesn't compromise what we've built here, what we have with Catherine. I don't want to be so focused on the community that I neglect my own family. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, Samuel said. Teaching children is part of raising. Catherine, you're showing her that women have value beyond the home, that education and community contribution matter. You're showing her that it's possible to be a mother and also be something else. Eleanor leaned against Samuel, watching their land stretch out before them. The mountains that had terrified her 18 months ago now felt like home. The wilderness that had seemed hostile was now familiar, protective even. Do you ever regret it? Eleanor asked. Marrying me? being forced into community because I arrived? Never, Samuel said firmly. Eleanor, you came here as a stranger, and instead of remaining isolated, I chose to build a life with you. That choice, that daily choice to engage with you, with the community, with the future, has transformed everything. I came to these mountains to escape life. Instead, I found that life is better when shared. As darkness fell completely and the first stars appeared overhead, Eleanor understood that her story had reached its natural resting point. Not an ending, exactly because life continued to unfold, but a place of genuine peace and wholeness. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, seeking security through matrimony. She'd discovered that real security came from within, from developing capability, from building genuine community, from loving another person completely and being loved in return. The mail-order bride had become a wife, a mother, a teacher, a member of a community. She'd transformed herself through work and determination and the willingness to build something real with another person. And in the Wyoming territory, beneath the vast sky and surrounded by mountains, Eleanor Hawthorne had finally found home. The end epilogue. 5 years later, the Hawthorne School had expanded to accommodate 50 students. Eleanor had trained 3 other teachers, and the curriculum had been expanded to include history, science, and even music. Children from settlements miles away traveled to attend the school, and Redemption Creek had become known as a place where education was valued. Catherine Hawthorne, now 5 years old, attended her mother's school, much to Eleanor's initial concern about conflict of interest. But Catherine proved to be a capable student who learned quickly and showed no signs of being treated preferentially. Eleanor was pregnant again. A second child was coming, due in October. Samuel had expressed delight and a certain amount of resigned acceptance about the additional life disruption that a newborn would bring. Margaret had formally retired from her unofficial role as community coordinator, passing the responsibility to a younger woman while remaining active in community decisions. Curtis had become the de facto mayor of Redemption Creek, a role he'd never sought but had evolved into naturally through his years of service and his ability to mediate community disputes. And on the property where Nathaniel's cabin had stood, a small stone monument had been erected, bearing his name and the dates of his life. Beside it was a plaque that read, "In memory of Nathaniel Hawthorne, whose vision for community continues through the school that bears his name and through the people who choose to build together." The mail-order bride had become part of the landscape, part of the community's identity. Her story was still told in Redemption Creek, the tale of a woman who arrived under unusual circumstances and became essential to the community's future. But Eleanor rarely thought about herself as the mail-order bride anymore. She thought of herself as Eleanor Hawthorne, wife of Samuel, mother of Catherine, teacher, community builder, and woman who had learned that home wasn't a place or a circumstance. Home was what you built with the people you chose to love. And Eleanor had chosen well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.